First of all, thank you for coming out and welcome to the Muscle Shoals Chapter, Alabama Archaeological Society. I am currently the president or co-presidents with Mark Cole, and Mark Cole sitting right over here. He and I are going to be putting the programs together for the rest of this season going up until April. And that'll be the last meeting. Actually, May will be the last meeting during this series. We plan to do essentially pre-Paleo here, go into Clovis and Clovis complexes local to this area in November, and then march our way through Archaic, maybe Middle Archaic, Woodland, Mississippian, and then at the end of all that, we're going to do some historical programs This is what today's presentation is going to be, early peopling of North and South America, the Beringia standstill theory, Beringia land bridge theory, Clovis first, the Solutrean theory, migration routes, Western stem, and Clovis discussion. Okay, and both Western stem and Clovis are a technology of Paleo people. Who am I? I'm a coach, swimming, rifle, handgun, shotgun, and I guess most importantly right now, volleyball. I've been doing 18 seasons, and I look at it this way. Give back to youth, give back to the community. This is giving back to the community, and Phi Gamma Delta Board of Chapter Advisors is giving back to youth. I was in the Army 26 years, 8 months, 14 days. Correction, 10 months, 14 days. Do not cheat yourself out of those 2 months, all right? I did deep fires, operational fires out to 1,200 miles. That means I coordinated everything, every weapon system that we had, okay, in terms of long-range fires. I worked Iron Dome in Israel, and I got to do that, and it was a wonderful experience. It was intense, it was long hours, and I loved it. Of things I missed, CRAM and Iron Dome are the things I missed. Counter-rocket artillery and mortar program led me into Iron Dome, and essentially what both of those two programs do is you shoot a rocket at us or artillery at us, we knock it out of the air before it arrives at the target. It has what we call a high-order detonation, and nobody's harmed because it blew up way up in the air and it's stuff just kind of falls to the ground. I started studying archaeology with Charlie here 47 and a half years ago. Mike Shipper drugged me out. He had a buddy that didn't like to get out in the woods as much as I did. He kind of said, let me get this straight. We're going to get on the river, crawl around with cottonmouths, and be on the river all day long. I said, sign me up. So I've been signed up ever since. So between Mike and Charles and Doug Puckett and Louise Young, who's the curator here, thank you very much, but especially to Mike for getting me out that very first time, and for Charlie for indulging me over the years. 11 and a half, 12 years old, Charlie swung by the house, picked me up, swung by Mike's house, picked him up, brought us down here to a meeting. It wasn't the first meeting, but the second meeting that I came to, Charles Hubbard hit the audience with this, and it inspired me and gave me the intellectual hook to do what I do now. Modern man and Paleo man, in terms of intelligence, potential are the same. If you go and look at brain cases, theirs is actually a little bit bigger than ours, okay? But in terms of actual intelligence and what they can do, and could they do calculus if you showed them all the stuff? Of course they could, okay? Just as intelligent as we are. The clincher that he got me with, who were Paleo people and what were they doing and why were they doing it? And so ever since I've been engrossed. So with no further introduction, let me kind of dig into this thing. People in introduction, the Beringia standstill hypothesis is 36 to 12,000 years ago. They came into Beringia, came over to the Alaska area, kind of up to it, and they stood still in that area. But if you look at the dates I'm going to show you, there's nothing standing still about the Beringian population because they continually came into the Americas, we think as early as 27,000 years ago, and for sure at just inside 20,000 years ago, as we'll show you as we go through the theory. The land bridge theory, where they came through the ice corridors, new study came out about 2 years ago and validated in March this year of 23 by Princeton University by doing a nitrogen analysis on the ground. There was no ice-free corridor available until about 12,000 years ago. So that knocked this one out because of this 20,000 year date. There's another date that shows this at 30. This is the most accepted one, but no longer valid theory. Clovis first, no longer valid because there are literally hundreds of sites older than this. The Solitarian theory still remains valid, and that's the one that says we came out of Europe. Western stem tradition is not a theory, but a technology, along with Clovis. And then the 5 possible routes. This is the land bridge theory. This is what was proposed. The date down here is 23,000 on this one. From study to study to study, it bounces between 20, 30, sometimes 36, but 20,000 is the more accepted. That was never open. The nitrogen analysis in the ground here shows that it's not opened. It shows it beginning, it shows a decent opening here at 13.4, and then a much larger area open between the northern ice sheet and the southern ice sheet that allow them to come through. But the original theory, remember, 30,000, 36, 30, 20, whichever number you want to pick, and who wrote it last.
Hey, Hayes.
Yes, sir.
A quick question. I know you studied DNA.
The DNA stuff's coming.
Okay.
Okay. And excellent question at that point.
A question.
Yes, sir.
Hey, if the land bridge was not used, how did the people get over to North America?
That's a good question, Charlie. There are 5 routes. The transatlantic route, least likely. This North Atlantic route, the second most least likely. This Pacific route, third. Mid-continental route, fourth. And then the North Pacific route, and it doesn't do a good job of showing it here, but essentially the Kelp Highway is the most likely avenue to approach, and that's what the DNA and the sites show as you go down the coast.
And this assumes no watercraft, right?
Pardon?
No watercraft?
Watercraft on this route. It's not a walking route. They were fishing, hopping, coming down, running out. You know, I ran out of natural materials right here, so I moved 200 miles, so on and so forth. There were already people here. I said hello, and then I went farther down because we were all the same ethnicity. And so I just like, hey, yeah, we knew them. We knew your grandparents, and then just slid on down the coastline until you finally get to Monteverde, down in South America. Okay, this is Beringia. Russia now, as it appears today. This is all underwater, and it was land. If you go from about this point right here up to here, it's 2,400 miles wide. So the narrow land bridge thing that we learned in school, it was never really narrow until it was closing off at about 11,002 to 10,008 when it was completely closed. There's arguments on, well, was it 13.2? Was it, you know, when is it exactly? And we'll say we don't know, but those numbers I just gave you are the more accepted numbers. This is a huge area. Okay. Genetic divergence out of Beringia. This came from mammoth trumpet, and this is the cleanest piece of genetics explanation of how and who that I've seen, and I found it during this. For this presentation, I did not read it initially when I got it 2 years ago, but it's from the mammoth trumpet. First Americans from East Asia populations, likely in Beringia about 30,000 years ago. This date varies, goes all the way back to 45,000, comes all the way in to 25,000. 24,000 years ago, East Asians split into at least 2 populations, possibly 6, but at least 2 populations that we can prove. Beringia, and one of these, they split in the Beringia area. One of these became the ancestral Native Americans. That split actually occurs more in the Russian side. This split does. Okay? Ancestral Native Americans came out of that group, and the ones that stayed behind became Paleo-Siberians, who later become the Thule people and the Inuit people. Okay? 23,000 years ago, the ancestral Native Americans and the PS became isolated from each other, and the group in the eastern half of Beringia remains in an ice-free corridor known as the Beringia standstill theory. Ancestral Native Americans then split again at about 1507. This date's been very firm so far, but you know why it's been so firm so far? We only have 17 sets of Paleo remains. This is one of the Paleo remains here, one of 17. So it's kind of hard to refute it if you're not looking at a bunch of other samples. Okay, but during this split, we ended up with northern Native Americans and southern Native Americans. The southern Native Americans pushed all the way down the coast, going to Monteverde and over into South America to the eastern side. The northern Native Americans spread out across the United States. What is today the modern United States. Mike will tell you that I studied this genetic thing for the last 8 years, and when I did the last presentation of this here in this room, I told everyone that the genetic study was just too hard to do. And I finally got it clearly in All Things, a dog article about Native American dogs coming with Paleo Americans. Okay, and this is what it looks like. This is the 30,000, 45,000 year date. Come into here. Once they get to here, and then if you look at old material that supported the land bridge theory, it says that the standstill was here. The new material says the standstill is here, and probably rightfully so, because that's where the DNA, only DNA analysis is being found. Okay? During this standstill, all of this happens. This is gene sequence, or genome pieces, A2, B2, C1b, so on and so forth. When I study these, each one of these has like 15 to 20 pages of writing. And I get about 2 paragraphs in, and I'll admit to you, I'm lost. Okay, so it's difficult to follow it, and so that one article and one mammoth trumpet really cleaned it up for me. All right. This line here, and this is what I think most people that don't look at this all the time like I do don't realize. The people didn't just go to the New World, they went back to the Old World. So that happens here, and then you look at 4 and 4 here, and then 3's going back. It does not show another line coming back. I think they actually came back also. But this is the later migration, and this is the Inuit people and the Thule people that came in at about 10,000 when the ice sheets were gone, and so they're coming across the 90-mile gap in the Bering Sea and going across, and then later on those people go all the way across to Greenland on the northern expanse. Wish I'd have mentioned the colors. You see the color here at 20,000, and then the color here, and then 15,000, and that's showing them coming down the North American coast, going down to South America, and a rapid expanse, and yes.
So these are people using Clovis technology, with the exception of the Inuit, right?
Yes, and also Western STEM technology.
Okay.
So both Clovis and Western STEM technology, and maybe a third technology that we just don't have enough evidence for.
So we've got 3. We've got a South American type, a Clovis type, and an Inuit type.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, let's expand that. There's Clovis, western stemmed.
Yes.
Fishtail, which is the,
Monteverde.
yeah, fishtail is Monteverde, but Monteverde is also western stemmed, depending on the age group. The fishtail culture is, we believe, equivalent to the Clovis culture, but those fishtails look more like Dalton culture than anything else, but it's hard to say. Some are fluted, some are not.
And Inuit.
And Inuit and Thule going across the top. And then just note the colors. That's supposed to be 20K, 15K, 10K, and then the green here that's showing 8,000. And that should represent all the way to 4,005 to 6,000, and then another migration during the woodland times of about 2,000 years ago, which is just not really depicted in this slide. Okay, this is where we think it all happened. If you look at this map 3 years ago, it all happened right here. Now it all happens right here. That's recent DNA evidence here. No DNA evidence here. But there is a site over in this area into Alaska called the Yana River site, which is very interesting because it shows both western stem technology and Clovis technology. Clovis technology over here is way younger than the Clovis technology that's further south down in the Americas. And I'll cover that in a minute. Okay, this just shows the corridor at 15,000 years ago. It's still really big. 14,000 years ago, it's gotten just a little smaller. 13,000 years ago, it's a lot smaller. 12, smaller again. Then 11,002 is supposed to be completely gone, depending on whose research are you looking at. And from here to here, there's different dates, depending on the article that you're reading and which PhD wrote it. Early migrations, I'm just hitting the same thing again, but it's showing you when you come down and you have dates that of 10,000 here, 17,000 here, makes sense. That's coming out of that area there and right here. Right here at Anzac and right here is where we believe the first Clovis technology is showing up. We're not certain because we just don't have a good enough carbon date or good enough luminescence dating to figure it out. What's important to note here is the southern Native American population went this way, and the northern Native population branches out here and goes this way and here. And this DNA remains true to here, with some southern DNA coming into this area sometime in the Middle Archaic period, and so you actually got southern Native American DNA right in here. Does that clean up your DNA question?
Yeah, just one other thing. So a lot of times when we meet people that are interested in archaeology and have found an arrowhead and they start asking about cultures, they're asking about Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, right? So is there any proof that there is a connection in DNA between these people and the Cherokee, Choctaw?
Absolutely. Cherokee, Choctaw. There's one other creek, our southern Native American DNA. And so that means those people came to here, went here first, and then came back up and settled here. And I know that because I'm Southern Native American DNA, and my line goes back to Choctaw.
So has the very first people in the New World were from Asia? Is that?
Absolutely. The very first people came out of here at that date of 25,000, 30,000, 45,000, came into Beringia, stayed in Beringia for a couple of thousand years. That mixing slide I showed you, I mean, I can back it up, but that mixing piece, and then when the two populations, the Paleo-Siberians and the ancient Beringians, separated and became isolated, from there was the split around 15,007, in which you had Southern Native Americans and Northern Native Americans. And so right now, other than a genome called X2B, there is no European DNA in the American Indian culture. X2B actually probably formed here and went that way. And so that X2B is coming out of Asia, going into Central Europe, going into Western Europe. But it was not a population that came out of the Silurian or the French, the Spanish area, like we've talked about in the past, right? There's no DNA evidence for that at all at this time.
So Hayes is doing a great job explaining a very, very complicated thing. Now he's talking about, when he talks about X2B, you're starting to get into whether these people were Homo sapiens sapien or Neanderthal, whether they were Asian or European, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but Hayes is right. Based on DNA, the first people in America, anyway, were Asian.
I think the other thing to understand in terms of, well, what is Cherokee and what is this? Those people at 10,000 years ago, that DNA sequence was not even in that area.
Exactly. It didn't. It doesn't. So the original DNA, that's the point I was hoping you would make, is the original DNA doesn't exist any longer. The Inuit probably have the closest match right now.
Inuit and Thule people have the closest match to Paleo-Siberian.
Right. The Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, that's a different mix from what you see in Alaska and
yes.
Ranger. Right. There's not a direct link between them and Paleo-Indian like there is Alaskan and Paleo-Indian.
Correct. All right. I've been chasing this genetic study since I did the last presentation on this in this room in March of 19. And I finally cleared it up in the last week or so. All right. As you come here, the significance here, there were two baby boys buried, two different mothers at this site here at one. That's around the Yana River site. That's a good thing because we got two different looks at DNA, two different mothers, two different sets of mitochondrial DNA, and that gave us a lot of good data and gave us a good date that I can't quite remember, read 11,005 right there. Then in the next one, we've got one baby boy buried at Anzac. The significance of the Anzac baby boy, over 200 Clovis artifacts from the Clovis culture were buried with this child. Okay, and then coming back over, see my blue dots. This slide in terms of dates has changed over and over again. I used this slide in 19, and this slide came from one of the Mammoth Trumpet publications. The Pearson Island site at 21,000. I've got a blue dot here and a blue dot here because these two sites were used to justify the Silurian theory. Okay, and the only claim that Silurian theory has is a similar lithic technology, but not an identical lithic technology. The strongest arrow in their quiver on this is Bruce Bradley quotes that there are 27 tools that are identical, and he doesn't think that that's coincidence. Okay, and then I'll cover a little bit more on that in a second. The Page-Latson site started out as Clovis only. They got a little bit deeper, and they figured out it was Western STEM technology in that site as well. So this site, just about straight south of here, down on the Florida coast area, which at the time that they occupied it was 200 kilometers inland, or about 145 to 160 miles inland. So it was not a coastal site. It's kind of a coastal site now, but it was not a coastal site when they were living there. This is the other Florida site, same thing. It's dating back to 14,000, Western STEM technology. Then Monteverde, Western STEM technology, along with a different technology. We're not quite sure what to call it yet. Number 12, Paisley Caves. We've always heard that there's one coprolite. A coprolite is simply preserved doo-doo, okay? Preserved human feces. I read an article about 3 or 4 days ago that there's actually more than a couple of hundred of them there, and that's one of the problems they were having is which one's older? Is there seepage from this level or seepage from the other level coming up by the water, the water table coming up and mixing everything up? They finally won their argument about 3 years ago. And the date we're going with now is about 18,000, well, correction, we're going with this date of 14,003. They had dates on this at 22,000. I think those 22,000 dates are probably valid, but they've been refuted by the gang of PhDs trying to figure everything out. Then if you look coming off the Kelp Highway, we get all the way down to here at 18,005. Yes, sir, you.
So when they found those 2 boys, you said at the beginning of the slide.
At Yana, yes.
So what was that burial plot, if that's the right word?
It doesn't say.
Land grave, a tomb, anything?
Well, it was a dig at Yana River, and they found these two pre-Paleo children buried. It doesn't mention that they think they died of a virus.
I mean, they were just in the dirt, or were they in a...
No, they were buried.
In something?
Yeah, in something, but...
I'm asking what that thing is.
I didn't have enough time to go research that to see what kind of burial furniture was there.
It's a cave or shelter, I think.
It's a cave shelter.
Okay.
And it's a complex. The Yana River area it's similar to Garth Slough. It's 1,200 yards long and 500 or 600 yards wide, and and at varying times we moved all around it. And that's what Yana looks like. But did I find a site report on it to say this is what was with it? No. The Anzac child, if you look in most places, it just says burial with Clovis points. If you look in these, it tells you it's a burial with over 200 Clovis items. Over 200 Clovis tools are in that burial. So make of that what you will. You can fantasize it was the chief's son. You can it was the shaman's son. It was the witch doctor's son. Who knows? But conclusive evidence of a paleo person with paleo DNA, with Southern Native American paleo DNA.
Any idea how those bones were preserved?
Lime. So it's a river area. Same thing as down here at the mound area. And if you ask me one more question, that's literally all I know about Yana. All right. This is the late migration. This is the Thule people and the Inuits, and they go here and they come back, and they go here and they come back. And then at about 4,500, I discussed this earlier, you get a second wave migration here. And then about woodland times, about 1,800 years ago, there's another migration coming out of here. So starts with boats somehow, and then comes across and down. And who those people were, I don't know. Nor do any scientists can tie any of the DNA here to that last migration.
Yeah. And when you put it on a map, it looks simple, right? But you're talking about 1,000 generations of people over 10,000 years.
Yep.
Seems like natural human instinct to head south, though, to warmer, better land, and they, like you said, they use up the resources, they pack up, move on, real tribal type of people.
Well, it didn't take you long to figure out the farther I came south and the closer I got to the equator, the more mild the weather was. The more mild the weather is, the more seafood that I can easily harvest. And oh, by the way, all these natural plants and berries and stuff that are growing, they got longer growing seasons. And so there's more food to forage for longer periods of time. So it's not just warmer, it facilitated a climate that grew stuff that you could eat. And it was all about finding the next meal back then. All right, the Silurian theory still remains valid. I've talked about it enough. 17,000 to 21,000 years ago is the most accepted timeline of the age. The very first thing that when Dr. Bradley and Dennis Stanford brought this up was, well, that's too old to be tied to Clovis. Well, it is. But you know, what we weren't thinking about was all the other people that were in the Americas at this time period. That's the proposed route they came. Is that possible? Absolutely. This map doesn't show it very well, but that's actually ice pack. And so when I initially got this theory, I thought of it in these terms. I was hunting walrus. I couldn't find them. I went farther. I went farther. I got caught up in a storm. I went over here, lots of food here. I went back to my people. I brought more people and went back and forth. Is that possible? Sure. However,
Were these people nomads?
no.
Is that where that term would come from?
None of these people were really true nomads. The Paleo people were living, they were seasonal hunters, but not nomads. What is a seasonal hunter? In this season, I lived next to the berry patches and the wild potatoes. In this season, I followed big game. At the end of that season, I went back to the berry patches. And so I moved around from area to area to area, but I was not nomadic in terms I just followed big game. I was nomadic in terms of I went to where the food was for the season. And I think it's a much better way of looking at it. And as you read the different publications, that's what it's telling you.
And that's a good question, because they weren't nomadic also, because even if they went out in small groups, they did come back to the larger group. There's evidence of that.
Yeah. So when this is Mark Cole, you know, my co-president, Mark's doing Clovis complexes next month. And then we'll get into just what you're talking about. Only evidence is what Dr. Bruce Bradley has said, 27 identical tools between the Silurian toolkit and the Clovis toolkit. Looks like a llama to me. You can make the argument of this blade right here. It's a beautiful blade. The trouble is every Stone Age culture in the world has this blade. Every one of them. Africa, North America, South America, Europe, we all have this blade. And these blades are from Europe.
One last question, and I'll be quiet. The Silurian guys are coming out of Europe?
Out of Spain, coming up to Doggerland, basically, and following the ice pack over.
There's no Solutrean DNA in North America. There's Solutrean-like tools and technology in North America.
Yeah. I've got a slide marked that says that, and I was just looking during the talk. I wish it had been right back there. But it comes up after this one. All right. This is a Silurian point found in Chesapeake Bay. This mammoth skull ended up in a Virginia museum. In 2013, Dr. Bradley was going every place he could, looking at mammoths, looking at artifacts that were in museums, trying to see if any Silurian stuff is misidentified in the Clovis stuff here. And he was digging around in a museum vault area, was looking at a mammoth skull and found this. Okay? That mammoth skull was dredged from the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay, I believe from, not oysters, shrimp. One of the fishery operations dredges the bottom, brings everything up. And so they were coming up with tons and tons of mammoth bones. Okay? This particular skull ended up in the museum, not on display, and he finds this point. This blue up here is where it's been retouched. This red here shows where they were cutting stuff with it. It doesn't go on to explain over here in this detail what they were cutting, and this shows the hafting area. How did the Solutarian point, identified and vetted by a whole bunch of PhD archaeologists, that that's exactly what it is, get to the Chesapeake Bay? I can't tell you, but dead mammoth floated across. It was frozen, broke off an iceberg, floated over to here and sank. Or there were actually people here that hunted this mammoth and killed it local in the Chesapeake area. We don't know. Okay? And then here, that slide should have been 2 slides back, right? No DNA trail for Solutarian, period. No DNA here, no DNA here, none at these 2 or 3 sites that Bruce Bradley shows. The other argument was all the fluted point technology that's right here. There's not one trace of DNA on this continent that we can find. If the 27 tool pieces are true, I would tell you that the technology made it over here. Maybe a small population made it over here. Will we ever find DNA for it? Probably won't. But they were not first. They're several thousand years behind the other sites. So, and that's one of the big arguments. Well, this was first. When you go back and you read Stanford and Bradley's literature, they've never claimed to be first. Other people claimed that they were first. Theory remains valid. Technology, I think, made it to the New World, and an intellectual battle continues. On the other side of that argument, the other side of the argument believes that Solutarian's dead and is going to remain dead. Bradley and a handful of others still thinks that it's valid. Western STEM tradition. This is a technology, it's a flint knapping technology, and it's evidently a seafaring technology because these are some of the first people that basically came down the coast fishing, hopping, big game hopping, whatever they're doing, but they got all the way down to Mount Monteverde at least 18,005 years ago. Scotts Bluff. I learned this yesterday. I did not realize it was a Western STEM technology point. I was looking at some different literature, getting ready for this, and I go, wow, didn't know that. Haskets, agate basins. Agate basins are found here rarely. Go 75 miles north, and they're found all over the place, but just not down in here. Okay? Yeah, hell gaps. I have a hell gap from here, and I know of one other hell gap found here. But they're here, but very rare. There are more agate basins found here than hell gaps.
Scotts Bluff, there's probably...
Scotts Bluff, there are a bunch of them. So the Scotts Bluff culture is a little bit younger, and so those people pushed over into here. It's more of an early archaic point. The Scotts Bluffs found out in the Great Basin area, Nevada area, those are much older. But the ones here date early archaic. All right. And then what we were talking about here, agate basin, This point is South American point. This site is about 300 miles northeast of Monteverde. The El Hobo point, one of the things that stemmed me into paleo only and nothing but paleo is I thought I had an El Hobo found up here. Lots of sweat, lots of research. What I most likely have is a really, really well-made lerma. Okay? But it's atypical, and that lerma I'm talking about that I found in '97 is one of the most beautiful lermas that I've ever found. And in anybody's collection, I only know of one other that's even like it. But that stemmed me into this, and at the time period, you could not find a picture of this anywhere. So I finally got some pictures, finally got the right literature, and when I went through and looked at the analysis, I've got a great lerma. Similar to this point, agate basin, the hasket, the significance here is this date's showing 14.3, other dates are showing the hasket pushing back to 18.5. The mesas out west and the sluiceway, figure it out, Alaska. Okay, and then from a Western STEM technology standpoint, I was like, well, what's this site, Blackwater Draw? That's actually the Buttermilk Creek site pushed over into New Mexico. All right, that's the Great Basin area, and that's the biggest concentration of Western STEM technology in the United States. The Hill Gap area is about where this is, and it goes to about 300 miles of here and comes this way. So there are some hill gaps found here, but just not very many. But it's a neat point, is it depending on whose study you look at, as old as Clovis, older than Clovis, or younger than Clovis. And I think most of the evidence points to just slightly younger than Clovis. All right, but anyway, it's a Western STEM technology point, and it is found here, and then the Scotts Bluff points that push into this area. There were lots of Scotts Bluff points pulled out of Russell Cave excavation. And I mean on the order of 50 plus. San Miguel Island, this gave us some great DNA testing. This is off the California coast and in the north. These are sandals that had gotten down into the mud and covered up and leached with lime, and so they did not decay. This is rope, and I wish these slides showed up better. This is rope that they think is from fishing nets. These things that look like some kind of wedge tool are actually beads. They're from a purple snail species, and when they're fresh, they're a deep purple color. So what they did is they cut the tops out of them and ran strings through them and actually wore those as beads. Okay, and then these are bone harpoons. This is from probably a fall-away shaft system. You're pointed on both ends. And what does that mean exactly? That means you got a big shaft like this. It's hollow on this end here. The harpoon sticking out of it, or the arrow point sticking out of it. You throw it, it goes up into the animal to the big shaft. The animal moves around a little bit. Big shaft falls off. You've got your other shaft, big one. And so now you've got two shots. You can throw again. Then you can run up, pick up your other one, and stick another one of these down into it. And that's the same type of system we believe that Clovis used. And the difference was the point was on a piece about this big, and then the point sticking off that piece had a pointed end in it, stuck into the main shaft, and you had the same system with Clovis in either a 3-part system or a 4-part system. Okay. This is from the sinkhole in Florida at the Page Latson site. This dark bison bone, it doesn't show up as good as it does just on the computer with the lighting, but these striations were probably here to hold it in place longer. Same type system. It's fitted, thrown, main shaft's retrieved and reloaded. And that's what we think these striations do here, is it helps hold it on so that you can get your animal stuck. And these are all projectile points, and that's the end that goes into the main shaft, and that's the business end. And these striations are all over the end that's supposed to stick into the main shaft. They call it non-slip there, non-slip texture surface. This is from the Yana River area, same place as the two little boys were found. A, B, C these are all ivory. D is also ivory. And those are fitted into a shaft system and supposed to be thrown. Now here's what I don't understand, how they were mounted with the curve, but maybe the shaft had a hole here, the curve goes into it here, and then it's tied and reinforced here and done that way. I don't know how you have that. Mark, you got any ideas?
I was thinking it was probably used more as a spear.
Yeah, well, and that's the major theory that Mark just said, is this is maybe a finishing weapon. And so they came in, had this long rod that they could get on one of the megafauna beasts and get in and get a heart shot on it, or maybe come in behind the skull and pierce the brain cavity. But they're neat, and those are ivory. Monteverde, El Hobo, so I went from no pictures to lots of pictures. My point's definitely not one. Yeah, be careful. Okay, what is Clovis? It's an archaeological complex that is recognized by a distinctive set of tools and technologies. The more distinctive piece of that technology is the flute that comes out here. This is supposed to show, and that shows my dog. I just asked Nellie, go find a Clovis for me and tell me what it is. This is supposed to show a Clovis platter in the making process. And it says Bafex technology, but it does not explain anywhere in the text what this is. This is like step 5. I started out with a piece of flint that was this big. I worked it down into these platters, so that piece of flint that was this big, I maybe got 2, 3, 4 platters off of it. I then took this platter down and worked it to this, then to this that is not fluted, and then finally to this fluted piece here. These are ivory projectile points. All these happen to be straight. I was wondering on the Yana River pieces if some kind of pressure bent those things over while they were in the ground. Something softened it and they bent, and then something else leached in and continued to preserve that ivory. But ivory lasts a long time anyway. And this is showing coming off a paleo core. You know, I show Mike these things out in the field, and he looks and he's like, I don't really think that's anything. And I'm like, well, yeah, actually it probably is, but we can't say for sure. Fluted point projectile distribution area. This is the study that David Anderson did out of University of Tennessee, and this is showing you the distribution. These are fluted points only, not just Clovis. So it's all the fluted points. So that's, you know, sometimes Redstone, sometimes Wheeler, Cumberland, Clovis, Midlands. There's some of those quads occasionally fluted. Some of the Wisconsin points that I'm not as familiar with are also fluted. This population density is amazing. The Clovis date, when I started doing this as a kid, we thought it was a 900 on the small end, you know, 900 years, going probably 2,000, 3,000 years, a 3,000 year span. As we came in the 90s, and we went through all these samples of DNA that we had and carbon-14 samples, we went to all those samples and we redid them with more modern techniques. The more modern technique, there's one study that says that this Clovis period lasted 350 years. The accepted timeline right now is about 550 years, with most archaeologists leaning to the 350-year mark. Okay? Do you think these people were nomadic and having a hard time surviving? Not at all. These people were thriving. If you just did this in 600 years, you're thriving. If you just did this in 1,000 years, I'm going to say you're thriving. But the archaeologists believe that timeline of the Clovis technology was about 350 years old. And that's all that it lasted. So, we came over, they're nomadic, we're following big game animals, and that's the only thing that they were doing. That's not the case at all. I started to put some slides in here, and for this is showing the gap, and at 12,000 years ago and during the Clovis times, that gap between the northern and southern ice sheets is open. But if that ice sheet was closed and we still came through here, the old world at 50,000 years ago had dog teams and sleds. Correction, 30,000 years ago had dog teams and sleds. The old world had bows and arrows at 72,000 to 74,000 years ago, with the more accepted date being at 67,000 years ago. The old world had boats, nice boats, reed boats, okay? When they came out of Beringia, they knew about all those technologies. So to say Paleo and Archaic never had bows and arrows, I don't think is correct. Have we found any evidence for it? No. Do I think that they had, especially the bow technology? Yes, I absolutely do. Because when you look at the Western STEM technology points, they're pretty small, and you could make the argument of atlatl, or you can make the argument of bow with a lot of those. Okay, and these are just nicer Clovises. I think they're pictures of Charlie's. Cumberland's is another fluted technology, pretty much the same as the Clovis technology. And these are nice, just nice Cumberland points. The difference between the two, Clovis is more rounded, like a modern cutting knife, and Cumberland is a spike, more like a dagger. And the way I look at this is a penetrating weapon, and it's relying on the shock and awe of the spear to come in, or the atlatl system and the dart to come in to provide shock value, whereas Clovis is cutting things up. Why fluted projectile point? I had 5 reasons up here before, and I eliminated 2 of them, and by the way, these publications have eliminated 2 of them. Mike Shipper gave me this one. Allows easy resharpening and edge repair. That's repeated in these books. Mike beat the books to it. Easy hafting is repeated in the books. In one article, in the Mammoth Trumpet, not from this quarter, but the previous quarter, there's a rather lengthy engineering article that talks about what the flute is doing and how it's doing it, and it's like 9 pages of a whole bunch of stuff I can't understand, but here's what I get, the same thing that the Paleo man got. They didn't break as much because they were stronger. They may have summarized that the flute was absorbing some of the impact, and they may not have. And they may have thought, well, that's driving the impact actually into the shafting and not onto the point. But the bottom line is you don't find a lot of broken Clovises. You find Clovises that are beat up along the edges, but most of the Clovises you find are mostly whole. Anybody got any other suggestions for hafting?
Could be religious.
There's a whole, I'd say 30% of the archaeologists out there are talking about it as some kind of cult religion. I'm not ready to say that yet, but it certainly could be. Anybody else? Paleo-Clovis culture connection, Clovis widely dispersed. I showed you the picture, everything. Goes from Llano River all the way to Monteverde to the southern tip of South America. I stayed with the 475-year date, which is about halfway in between the 650 and the 350 now. And then, depends on whose literature you look at, is what is that date actually. I will say this, in the last 2 years, Paleo America says 350 years only. Clovis complexes, Blackwater Draw, Buttermilk Creek, and Page Latson. What all three of those things have in common, it's not a site like this. It's a site that's 400, 500, 600 yards wide, 8 or 9, sometimes a mile and a half long. These were groups of people that were coming back in, living together for a time, and then going back out and collecting flints and collecting other things and hunting. And that's the fluted projectile points. Maybe the sun's better. This is COVID-19 dispersal.
That's neat.
And then when you come, if I can take it back, wow, I did that on purpose. That looks just like COVID-19 dispersal. Well, why is that? Well, hard to live in the mountains. Lots of fresh water here, some mountains here, but not, they've got the mountain range there. But all this is showing you where it's easy to live and food resources are easy to get to. Transportation makes this coast easier than this coast. And then look at COVID distribution, and it looks almost identical to the fluted point distribution. I wish that had been my idea, but I found that yesterday. And then that shows it to you together, and the lighting just doesn't let you see it. People in North and South America. Multiple people events occurred from approximately 23 to 11K. And then I left off the Thule people in the event, and then the 1,800 people in the event. But it's been continual. Anglo-Saxon Celtics was a people in the event also when we came to the New World. Just like people in North and South America, it continues on. And I'm sure at 1,000 years from now, there'll be a different mix of people here than there are today. Beringia Central Asia migration confirmed by genetics. The standstill was in excess of 15 to 35,000. We don't know yet, and probably are never going to know exactly how long that lasted. Earliest sites in Beringia, and people were not standing still. There's nothing standing still about the Beringia standstill as far as people coming in and out of there. That standstill represented a population that lived in 620,000 square miles that had lots of resources, and they ventured out and went to other places with more resources. This was, I thought this would be an easier presentation to do. It turned out to be too much new information. Of the slides that I had from the previous one, I used 4 or 5, and that's it. Everything else had to be redone because the one I did in 19, the ice-free corridor was still valid. The Solutarian theory was becoming less valid and is much less valid today than it was in 19 when I pitched it before.